Mr. Neumeier, it's so good to see you again. I don't know if you remember, it was almost exactly a year ago that we had such a nice visit and a lengthier interview at your home and your foundation, of
Yes,
course.
of course. I do
I can't think
remember.
of a better way to start out a new year than a conversation with you. Maybe
Thank
we can
you.
make it an annual tradition.
Thank you.
And last year we spoke at length about your Chicago history and primarily the impact that Sybil Shearer had on your career. You worked with her, obviously, while you were a student at Marquette. And in that interview, you said that years later, you were able to recognize aspects of her in your choreography.
Hmm.
Your work seems quite different to me from her work. So I was wondering if you could explain what you mean there.
Sure. I'm not sure how much of my work you know. There are certain pieces that are, let's say, more well known, like Lady of the Camellias, which probably is not so much influenced by Sybil. I think, though, if you would look carefully, the influence is quite important. I think it started the very first day that I met Sybil, because we had a lunch, and then it was with Helen Morrison, her friend, who was a wonderful photographer. And then Helen said, Sybil, why don't you dance for John? And to dance for me, she didn't get dressed up, or she didn't put on practice clothes, or she didn't put on a costume. She danced in what she had been wearing. And I think that this already was an important influence, because the dance was not the decoration of a costume, did not need the decoration of the costume, but was the expression of a human being through their movements expressing something. And that, for example, if you look through, I mean, I've done 161 ballets, I think, by now. I don't, as I say, I don't know how many you know, but if you would look through many of them, you would see this idea that the costume becomes, for example, less and less important. And the work that I've done with fashion designers like Jill Sander, like Giorgio Armani, like Acris, is an attempt to have the person dancing as a person. I think that there are other aspects that were important for me, and they started also on that day. The fact that Sybil was way ahead of her time in terms of the isolation of movement, the isolation of movements, which gave the impression that she was not making the movement, but the movement was being done to her. And this resulted in a form of comedy which was based not on a literary idea or subject or theme, but based on a pure human communication of the vulnerability of the human being. And I think that even if you would see the last ballet, which I've only got to a dress rehearsal, which is the Beethoven project, in the Beethoven violin piano sonata, there is a movement in which the men work dance in exactly this way, that it is the isolation of their movement that gives us a sense of humor. And I think the third important thing is the idea of a modern movement lyricism. We generally think that our sense of lyricism comes from the 19th century, from the fact of we had a lot of birds and fairies running around. But Sybil's sense of lyrical movement had to do with, again, the human body and the fact of the weight of how the weight was controlled and how this magically communicated a sense of lyricism. And I think that these movement elements, if you would study a lot of my choreography, you would discover I never consciously thought of imitating Sybil, because the interesting thing, I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry, but it's a very interesting subject for me also, was that when we worked with her little company, there was a big difference between what we got to do and what she did. And it was one of the frustrations I had, and one of the feelings I really decided I couldn't really work with her anymore, was that she didn't so often let us actually see what she was doing. I think she was not so much interested in having people learn exactly what she did as doing what she did, and having people, in a sense, discovering a sense of space through using human bodies. And one more element, which I think just occurred to me at this moment, is that Sybil, you may not think of that, was basically a dramatic choreographer. Drama was very important for her. And if you read her autobiography, I was quite surprised at how important drama was for her in the beginning of her career. Drama, not in the sense of dance being an expression of an already written text, but drama in the sense of the idea that dance is basically the living shape of emotion. And this was always part, particularly, of the movement that she did herself. And this is my basic theory, the essence of my work is the idea that movement is the living shape of emotion.
Wow, well, now I can see the connection really clearly. Thank you for that.
Yeah, maybe I talk too much, but it's an interesting subject.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this is for. So thank you, even though it's an abbreviated interview. It also strikes me too about, you were talking about your 161 ballets, you were both so, and you still are, so prolific. And it seems to me like it is this theory of dance as the foundational spirit of everything that at least motivated her to just create and create and create too.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the question.
It was just an observation.
Oh, observation, okay.
But yes, I mean, every time we talk, you just make me think so much about both her work and your work. The story of when you met Sybil, which was, as I understood it at first, like in a sense, she was wondering whether or not she would work with you as a dancer, but she seemed to sort of like turn the tables, and instead of you dancing for her first, she got up and danced for you, which strikes me as highly unusual, but also just so generous. And it seems like in how you're describing her relationship with dance in general, she really understood it as a way for her to express generosity. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and just about, being in the studio with her as a person.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is right. I think the fact that for her, just as it was normal, I was coming to speak with her, I was meeting her for the first time, thinking, I mean, I was very young, thinking about the possibility of being able to work with her, but it was very normal that we should first have a wonderful lunch and then go into the studio And then, as I said, Helen said, Sybil dance for John. Then of course she asked me to dance, to improvise. And that was, of course, a good exchange. But I think the point is that, as we know the legend of Sybil, she had this incredible career as a solo artist in New York. Everyone who was of a certain age, I missed it, but a few years above me, remembers the Carnegie Hall concert, which must be an amazing experience. But I think that the fact that, and her work with Agnes de Mille, for example, the fact that, let's be honest, I think she inspired Agnes. I think that she not only inspired her, but I think she gave her a lot of material to work with, because Agnes was a great organizer and arranger of dance, not a particularly original inventor of movement, which Sybil was an endless inventor of movement. But Sybil didn't want the idea that on the 21st of March will be the premiere of this work, the critics will come, it's good or bad, and then you have to think about what you're doing next. Get yourself all ready, get yourself made up, get a costume with a lot of glitter on it, and go on the stage. This whole concept of dance being that kind of, let's say, artificial level of human existence did not appeal to her. And we see that from the incredible photographs that Helen Morrison took of her, the films that Helen took of her, some of them in the forest, in the meadow, in a relationship with a tree, that for Sybil, dance was something much more humanly essential than just the theater. I mean, that was, again, working with her, part of my frustration as a very young man, because I always wondered, when are we going to show this? And we're working on this. And it was very often so that we would work on what she felt like at that moment. One day we would be doing a Bruegel piece, then that would be gone. And then the next time we think, oh, we're going to do Bruegel, but then we would be doing, the reflection in the puddle is mine. And she had wonderful titles always for her work. But, and the feeling was that there was we were about 8, or I suppose about 8 dancers with her. There was always the feeling of incredible respect for her. And I mean, it was obvious that she didn't need to gain that respect in any way, because just watching her made you respectful, unless you were really stupid. But nobody really would say, but Sybil, when are we going to do this? And so, I mean, all the time I worked, probably 3 years with her, we did one concert. I mean, I performed in one concert. So she did the thing when she felt the piece was ready. But that, going on the stage, doing it on the stage, was not so much different from what she did in the studio or in the meadow or in the forest. It was a part of a natural extension of an emotional movement experience as part of life.
That was very well said. We're just so proud that you're part of the Chicago dance legacy too. And it's great to learn about that aspect of your career a little bit more. Thank you so much for your time and your generosity. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm so glad we could include you in this event.
Thank you.